Hi,
Welcome,
everyone. Welcome. Go ahead, Jenny.
Hello. We're just going to let people in for a little bit. It was an exciting day in the streets of New York with so many people out there in front of the courthouse. It's been 3 days of folks in the street. It's been really, really good to feel the activism against the fascism. Even I just want to say, even wild to see some of our, most horrible members of Congress and the Senate speaking up. So you just like, you want to say, where were you 15 months ago? But we're just happy when they start to feel it. The flames are licking at the ankles finally of power. So that's the good news. I mean, another thing that just happened was the Heritage think tank, which is the worst warmongering think tank, just said we need to quit sending weapons to Israel. I'm just like, so you never know where it's going to come from. There's horrors daily that we come together, we pivot to the local peace economy, and we take care of people and our hearts and each other. And the other very cool thing was I was in the streets with Tim Reese, who's here. I just saw him. Did he disappear? There you are. This was it yesterday? It was just yesterday. These days are so long and full. Yesterday we went to Google and delivered the petitions of over 5,000 people asking Google to quit supporting the lie that the Gulf of Mexico is the Gulf of America. And what was interesting is Michelle, who we were doing it for, who runs our Latin America campaign, said, why don't you go around and, video people and ask them what they think about it? And the sad part, and like, always why we do actions, is they're always teaching us. Engaging always teaches you, right? And what it taught us were members of people who are on the Google campus are not allowed to have opinions about anything. And it was really sad to watch their fear, I have to say. Tim, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, it was. I mean, they didn't have any opinion at all, and he definitely felt they were afraid to say anything. So, like you say, that was sad. And the other point would like to make is we found out yesterday that it's only the 12-mile limit. And Google should name that part the Gulf of America, and the rest should remain the Gulf of Mexico. But we'll see if that happens. I doubt it.
Yeah, no, they're definitely bowing to the pressures. And we're just kind of pointing it out and exposing them for who they are. But yeah, it's only 12 miles that the United States owns, and so it's imperialism at its worst, or not its worst. It just is its most ridiculous.
It's
Um,
just like politically correct, to be white.
we also posted a video yesterday. I'll try to find it when Marie's reading poetry. But the other thing that we got to teach them was that it's been the Gulf of Mexico for 500 years, which is before the United States of America existed. And that, by the way, Trump is only president for 4 years. So the fact that you're bowing to something that's so short makes us wonder about your thought processes and capacity to think. But anyway, welcome everyone. Do we have anyone new? Thanks, Kat. Is this anyone's first time? Introduce yourself. You'll get other chances if you don't want to do it right now. We usually start by grounding into ourselves and into a piece of culture. So I'm going to turn it over to Marie.
All right. So I want to make a little announcement before we do the grounding. And that announcement is that we're going to do breakouts a little bit differently tonight. We're going to break for breakouts with questions like normal at 8:40 instead of 8:30. But then we're going to let you stay in your breakout rooms until the conversation is finished. We're not going to come back to this main room. And you get to stay in the breakouts and talk and connect for as long as you wish and leave when you feel called to leave. And I will close the rooms down when the last person other than me leaves. So people have been writing us over the last, few months actually asking for longer breakouts. And we felt like that this way would allow you to have much more easeful and connective conversation. So I hope that that solves some of that issue.
Well, it's also the our session today is about time.
Right.
So we didn't want time to be oppressive today.
Yeah, I know. I realized that the clock counting down those last 60 seconds, it brings some anxiety. I've been in breakout rooms where I felt, everybody in the room felt anxiety about that. So that won't happen this time. So I was researching poems that might reflect tonight's theme, and I found two great poems written by other people. And then I realized that I had written a poem a few years ago that also related to to the theme. And so I'm going to read you a poem of my own. The first poem is called Reflecting on the Passage of Time by Barbara Crooker. And she writes, in the middle of a life that's as complicated as everyone else's, struggling for balance, juggling time, the mantle clock that was my grandfather's has stopped at 9:20. We haven't had time to get it repaired. The brass pendulum is still, the chimes don't ring. One day you look out the window, green summer, the next the leaves have already fallen and the gray sky lowers the horizon. Our children almost grown, our parents gone. It happened so fast. Each day we must learn again how to love between morning's quick coffee and evening's slow return. Steam from a pot of soup rises, mixing with the yeasty smell of baking bread. Our bodies twine, and the big black dog pushes his great head between. His tail is a metronome, 3/4 time. We'll never get there. Time is always ahead of us, running down the beach, urging us on faster and faster. But sometimes we take off our watches. Sometimes we lie in the hammock, caught between the mesh of rope and the net of stars, suspended, tangled up, in love, and running out of time. The next poem is one you might be familiar with if you're a Mary Oliver fan, which I am. I actually, when she died, I held a poet's wake it for her in my living room, and people came and read her poetry together because we loved her so much. And this one is one of my favorites. It's called Don't Hesitate. If you suddenly and unexpectedly feel joy, don't hesitate. Give in to it. There are plenty of lives and whole towns destroyed or about to be. We are not wise and not very often kind, and much can never be redeemed. Still, life has some possibility left. Perhaps it is on its way and fighting back, and that sometimes something happens better than all of the riches or power in the world. It could be anything, but very likely you notice it in the instance when love begins. Anyway, that's often the case. Anyway, whatever it is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of its plenty. Joy is not made to be a crumb. And then finally, my poem is called If You Walk With Me. I wrote it a few years ago walking in an arboretum. And I had just read an article in the morning that said that people who walk slowly are more likely to die early. And I was a little bit offended by that. And so I wrote this poem in response to that. It said, if you walk with me, know this. I stop for thistle flowers and the smell of honeysuckle. When birds warble in the field, I still my footsteps to hear if it's me they wish to bring into communion. I rest sometimes on a lonely shaded bench and wait for the world to forget me. And they do. It does. The insects whir, the frogs bleat again for a lover, and the birds go back to tending their nests, the trees dancing around them, courting the sky. So if you walk with me, know that we will not walk at a brisk pace. We will not walk with the world outside of us. We will not walk without conversation, even if we speak not one word between us. Know this if you walk with me. And that's it for the grounding. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. So if everybody can just take a deep breath, feel all that was just shared, the wisdom, the heart, the space, the reminders as we come together today. And I want to welcome Kaylee. Kaylee, if you want to introduce yourself, where you're from, what you're looking for, because we like to be able to serve your needs. And since you're new, like, just to say we move into ideas around the peace economy in each session and then explore them together in breakouts. Today it's about time. So up to you if you want to come on camera, introduce yourself. Yes, not. Is there anyone else here who's for the first time? Everybody else, to put your name and where you're coming in from in the chat. Okay, thanks for letting us know, Kaylee. And T, do you want to share? You want to say hi? Where you're from? Looks like also T's off camera. All right, well, we have room. Oh, thanks. To check in later before I head off in this conversation about time. So time is a weapon of the war economy. And if we look at some of our pivots, they're very aligned with time. But time, maybe Marie, if you could take us into your historical piece of time before I take it into the war economy.
Yeah,
Marie,
sure. I'm happy to do that.
actually,
I,
deep understanding here. Before I move it into how we get used by it, let's start at the root.
I don't often get to talk about what I wrote my dissertation on. And so because I pivoted and didn't do academia, and I specifically did not do Bronze Age archaeoastronomy, which is what I was doing my dissertation on. And so so rarely get to nerd out on my dissertation topic. So I'm just going to do it a little bit here. So I was very, very interested in how archaeologically we can look at time and the measurement of time. And I was focused on the Minoan culture, which some of you may have heard about, on the island of Crete. And the part of the culture I was interested in spanned from 3000 BC, so that's 5,000 years ago, to about 1700 BC, so a 1300-year time span. And in that time span, people went from living in small family social groups and burying their dead all together in these communal tombs. And they lived very hyper locally, and there were very few imported items. And they were pastoralists, and they ate their olives, and they raised their mutton, and their lives were very local. And then what seems like archaeologically a boom, something went off, and they were building palaces and shipping things in from the Near East and from Egypt. And there was a lot of coordination going on between the cultures in Crete, the palatial system in Crete, and these foreign entities. And they were creating not just like big houses, when I say palaces, they created 10-story enormous buildings with flushing toilets. Like literally, I mean, like they were marvels of engineering. And they were painted with white lime, so they shone like diamonds in the sun. And they were painted into mountainsides, and so they were held up by the mountains. It wasn't just like a 10-story building out of nowhere. They were held up by mountains, and it was quite a feat. And it feels like in an instant archaeologically, but it really happened over the span of 200 years. And so I was very interested in trying to figure out how time had been measured before that happened, during that time when the change was happening, and then after. And what I saw was that archaeologically, the mnemonic systems that they were using to track days were very local and very quixotic. They didn't really match up to each other. They kind of looked like each other, but every family system had different ways of tracking time. And there were as many different ways or patterns of their calendar system as there were individual calendars. But once the palatial system started, these calendars became very rigid, became um, they dominated and they were exactly the same all over the island. And they related mathematically to the systems in Egypt, which helped to give us our calendars and our time systems and our astronomy, our clocks directly relate to Egyptian timekeeping and Near Eastern timekeeping. And all of a sudden, everybody, especially the palaces, were keeping, um, they were very interested in making sure that everybody tracked time exactly the same way across the island and in conjunction with these larger dominating empires that surrounded them to the east and to the south. And I always thought that that was an extremely interesting transition and is something that um, really is, obviously neoliberal capitalism expanded on it and put it on steroids, especially during the Middle Ages and when we began having our modern banking system. And but I can see its roots in that those very early systems on Crete. And so I thought I would share. It's something I'm fascinated about. So
Thank you, Marie. So yes, time, to create these big things where those that have want to use those that don't to make something happen, time is used. Um, and I'm sure we have all felt the oppression of time. But, let's look at a couple of, pivots. So, distraction to attention. We don't think about that as time, but it's if you're oppressed with time, um, how it's like, what is being present? Being present is being present in the moment. And I've experienced where you can expand time when you're present in the moment, right? So who's, you know, had that experience of when you're just present, there's like almost a sense of timelessness. It's just time expands, you don't feel oppressed by it. So when we talk about time, there's the clock, which, can serve as a tool or an oppressor, or, as it can be something that serves us or something that oppresses us, right? We know how that works. So it's like all technologies, they can play many roles, oppressive and in service. But capitalism, took time as an oppressor. It really used it as a way to harness, to use as you have to show up in. Fortunately, labor unions, compressed the amount of time that they could have of labor. Um, but when we look at our addictions to our war economy habits and then the peace economy habits, one of the things we see is that time gets liberated in the peace economy because what happens? We're in exploration. We're not in the chasing, we're in the exploring. It's not limited. And so when we say we live in a free society, think about time and its oppression in this free society. Think of the ways, just, I don't know if anybody wants to pop in of like where they have felt the oppression of time. How do you feel time? Um, and I can even speak to like some people who get a vacation, right? It's like we've also the word leisure isn't necessarily, that time maybe isn't necessarily used to nourish, to expand. It also has the same oppression of time inside of it, right? You could have a vacation and it has that same oppression of time. Scarcity. Time is one of those things you can feel as scarce, right? It's like, I don't have enough time is something you hear people say all the time. I don't have enough time. And yet, how much time in our day do we actually use to serve life, to nourish ourselves, to nourish our communities? So one of the things that we thought about when we first started the local peace economy work was to do an audit of our time. Because we look at our money, we audit our money, we budget our money, but do we look at our time, which is our life? Do we look at what we do with the way that is described by the clock and say, wow, what did I do in the last hour? Do we notice where the oppression of time makes us more distracted and therefore less even available to the moment? So I'm bringing up all these questions because we're all going to have a different relationship to it. But just having a relationship to it in a way of, how do I liberate myself from the oppression of time, is also a way to open up the space for the peace economy. Because in the peace economy, we look at abundance, right? We say we move from scarcity to abundance. How to create abundance of time. And sometimes, like with auditing, where we are in relationship to the war economy audits, addictions, time is one of them where you can kind of look at, like, where have I been caught up in the story of time, in the story of what has to happen, in the story of what do I get done, in the story of what there are so many things that get, barnacled onto time. And how to unbarnacle these things from time and have it be yours. Have it be, how do we liberate the time that the war economy is taking up into flowing that time into where we can be cultivating a peace economy. So first of all, before that can happen, you've just got to even reflect on it. Time. How do I relate to it? How does it use me? How do I use it? Is it control of me? Am I in control of it? We're not in control of anything, but in the way it's like, is it my boss? Or am I its boss? So one of the pivots is urgency to wisdom. And so, if we look at the war economy addictions, many of them you can see have time at the root, where it's the contraction of time that keeps us from having the abundance or the possibility or the value of the peace economy. Urgency to wisdom, I think, is one. It's like we've been trained into this urgency, into it has to get done. What am I getting done? Like all of that. And wisdom arises in the space of reflection. Do we have that space of reflection? That's where we get smarter. And, as I'm always like, as I look at a moment, I'm like, what can I do in this moment of where you're watching everyone in panic and, oh my God, it's like, that's where you can say, I need to breathe. I need to open up this space because I'm watching everyone in contraction. And so it's like, oh, how do I open up this space? How do I have reflection here? And it's also, when we engage in activism at CODEPINK, one of our jobs is we're engaging to learn. They're not going to learn. We're engaging to expose them and learn even deeper. what is the violent structure that we're in relationship to? Well, that takes time to like witness, to reflect on. So if we also look at where do we lose what we need for the future in the structures that we're in around time. So I wanted, before we move into the breakouts, to see, what are your relationships with time? What are your questions? Where have you found freedom in time? And we're going to take this deeper, and you're going to be able to talk about it together in the breakouts. But, let's raise that up before we go into breakouts, because we're not going to be together after. I would just love to hear some voices of, where have you seen time expand? Those things where it, can be, oh my God, Einstein had a really good one. Um, um, Something about where holding, he said, when I hold my wife's hand, um, a minute can feel like an hour of nourishment. But when you sit on a hot stove, a minute can feel like an hour. Like, so how does time expand in relationship to what's happening in the moment? And where have you felt timeless, and where have you felt the oppression of time? Anybody want to share their adventure with time? And thank you, Marie, for yours, which was beautiful and inviting. Joe. Whoops.
Okay. It's wonderful that this is happening when it's happening right now. I'm sure many of us have had that experience. You can't believe how there's a convergence of relevant insights that occur. And of course, they occur in a time that allows that. Uh, in my mindfulness meditation, which is based on Thich Nhat Hanh, which I practice regularly, today, as often happens, there was a new insight, which was not only deep listening, but which my mind is scattering all over the place when I try to do it, but also seeing, because I'm now in the process of working on a project called Building Peace. We can't go on like this anymore, my God. And each person that has any kind of grain of insight into where we are and a possible breath of how we can get out. We can't go on like this. So anyway, I was very, very grateful for this convergence of a deep presence in both listening and seeing simultaneously. And I know that that's part of the process I'll be using, because it's going to have a visual. I'm an artist, so there'll be a visual as well as written parts. God knows what else.
So thank you, because that was because you took time. That's where you took
Well, yeah, that's
you
right.
took time, and what it did was allow you to see and hear.
That's right.
I also want to say something you said, which is really good, that applies to this time. So not letting the moment of history oppress us either. It
That's
is just happening. So how do we breathe and be in relationship to it as a happening instead of as an oppression, as a relationship, as a wisdom, as a learning space? So thank you, Joe, because it's both your whole you were the boss of your time. You took it. You were silent.
I'm not sure I'm the boss of it.
Well, but you took time.
Yes,
Meditating is you taking time. Time's not taking you.
that's right.
Okay, and you could listen and you could see. And you said something at the beginning. It was like the time we are in. So it's also the time we are in that is taking some people into feeling oppressed and therefore not available to think and feel. And yet we can go breathe and in this time get so much smarter, because in this time, much that has been hidden to so many is visible to all. So
Yes.
it's a moment where we can all get so much smarter so fast if
Yes.
we take the time to see and hear. So thanks, Joe. I want to turn to Kat next.
Okay, so I had two thoughts when you talked about time expanding, just when I was doing a couple, just two different activities, I guess, that I was doing. One, we had this super huge cicada boom last year here in Missouri. Like they were, I don't remember seeing this kind before. Like I didn't know there were so many species until I looked it up, but they were everywhere. And like people step on them and stuff, and it makes me sad because I'm like, they don't do anything. They just crawl out of the dirt and then they mate and they die. That's all they do. Like, and they live underground for like 7 years or something. They're like, they don't have a life. You know, like it's just so sad. And all they do is just crawl around, and everybody hates them because they're noisy, but I like their sounds. And so I picked them up, and like there would be like 30 on the sidewalk, and I'd be like walking into work. It didn't matter to me how long it took because I was like, they don't need to get stepped on. I don't want them to die just by getting squished. You know, they don't live very long. So I picked them up and put them like not on the sidewalk. I don't know if it really helped. Maybe they got eaten later, you know, but that ended up getting me in trouble at work because I would do it on my breaks when I was walking, and it would take me too long to go back inside. So, but I didn't feel like it took that long. And then another thing is like I'm like a big bookworm, and when I'm reading something, you know, like I could read for a couple hours, and then I'll be like, crap, there went my afternoon, you know. But like other times when I'm like, okay, I only have this long to read. Like I've got like 15 minutes, so I'm just gonna read what I can. I feel like I read more. Like it feels like I'm constantly looking, and I'm like, no, I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet. I'm not done. Okay, now I am. Like it's so
That's
weird.
a very, very good point, Kat. So when you put the time limit on, it also limits the enjoyment and that sense of getting lost in and really being nurtured by. So thank you. That's a good point. Billy.
Hi. Yeah, I was just thinking of how time is like a currency, kind of like what you were saying. And I think about it through the lens of disability and accessibility, often in spaces that when someone, like when the people are trying to make it an accessible space, something that gets in the way is time. Like if someone takes longer to move or to process or to speak, that's like the biggest currency that, or scarcity, like, yeah, that gets in the way.
Thank you. That's very good. Because we're all moving at a different time, in a different time. And we don't even realize our own movement or our own needs can be oppressive to others trying to show up in our time. Thank you. Very, very good observation. And Kat, you know, I love that you can, you know, that you speak to nature. So I think that's a really good point that Kat made is often nature expands time for us. I don't know for me, but there's a way that nature brings us into a present that feels like, well, first of all, it draws us like into that sense of timelessness that we can get lost in. And you know, the thing that is oppressing us with time doesn't seem as valuable anymore. It doesn't have the power over us in the same way. So that's a great observation. I think that even walking into nature is a good way to realign ourselves with time. But I would suggest, you know, that doing an audit around your relationship with time will bring you into the present of your own relationship with it. And Tim, you bring up time as in lifetime. And I'm just curious because you know, you're speaking it like time feels limited to you because of your age. But I want to ask you, do you feel like time is more available to you at your age? So, did you always have as much time to express and do all the things that you wanted to do? Or is this time of life giving you more back for your time? Just curious.
Um, well, sometimes I feel like I have less time, even though I, but the main thing is I don't have the stress of work. And that's a big, the time. Oh, I got to be here. I got to do this. Got this meeting. Oh, heck, everything's and that part is gone. So that part is really good. So now I do what I want, but I'm still busy. And like you're busy as heck and you're really not working. It's kind of fun for you, but it's still trying to maintain that balance. I like that point you said earlier about the time we are in. It's really stressful now. And I've always been, since I was in college and I read about the Stoics, try to maintain that balance. And the Buddha, everything's good and bad. You can't let one go to the other. And it takes constant work. Try to not to be overwhelmed by grief or joy. You just have to uh, try to accept life as it is and control what you can and what you can't. And like you say, that you go into nature and you're into that eternity of time where everything just seems, for me anyway, flows out and there's no time. It's all time, or I don't know how you wanted to say it.
Well, that was really good, Tim, because I think too, um, it's not, there's something about being able to be related to all of it. From the space you're talking about is you're in relationship with, and you have the freedom to be, like you said, choose, right? Instead of having like, I've got to be there. So even in our choosing, we can be mad, people like you and me and showing up to everything, but there's some liberation in that. Like, I know
Yes.
at any moment I could say no, right? I could just turn around and say no. I'm a volunteer every day, all day. I get to choose. My children are always like, Mom, you just do too much. Why don't you? I'm like, I'm in joy. Like, I was like, if I know that in any moment I could just stop. So I don't feel time as oppressive. Matter of fact, I feel like I can expand time. I can make so much shit happen in a day and I can never feel time because I just keep adding stuff and it just all happens, So, and if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. And I'm just like, oh, whatever. So it's like having that relationship with it not being the oppressor, but certainly like, again, it's like, how am I using time for what I want to be doing? And there's a way when you're not oppressed by it that it expands. At least that's my experience, where I just keep
Yeah,
adding
it
things
becomes
on.
more joyful. Time is more joyful now.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and I think that's part of the expansion, Even though
yeah.
when you look ahead, you go, "Oh, gosh, how much time do I got?" Kind of.
As 70-year-olds, we're speaking from another place.
I
Valerie, let's hear from you.
Yeah, when Tim was talking about the Buddha, I looked up a reference from Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism, and it says Nichiren Daishonin writes that one day of life is more valuable than all the treasures of the universe. Time equals life. It is a priceless treasure. Those who value time value life. Those who value life are those ones who will create peace in the world. So I thought
Thank
that would be appropriate.
thank you, Valerie. That is beautiful and a beautiful way to take us into having conversations with each other about time. So we've seen in this conversation here that it is life. Thank you, Valerie. Time is our lives. And I think to even witness that, it's just like, it's our life. And there's a way the war economy takes us away from our life. It wants to own our life. It wants us not to be related to our life. It wants us to give up our life to what it needs. So, I I hope you can have a conversation together about even like ideas you have about how to think about it or what you do, to share with each other, because even just in the conversation in the next few days, that hopefully will have some liberating effects for you. And so Marie, groups of 3, right? And just because there's no time and because it's yours, it's not over, you know, like in 15 minutes as usual. It's your time together is yours. So Marie will put you in breakout rooms.
Yes, I'm going to put everybody in breakout rooms, and I wanted to remind you that you're not going to come back to this space. It'll be groups of 2 or 3. If you're in a group alone, if for some reason the people that were in your group don't come to that group, I can't control that, but we will move you if we see that happening. So don't worry. And we also just stay in the room until the conversation ends, and then just leave the conversation, just leave the Zoom room. You don't have to come back to this main space, and I'm not going to pull you back. So I hope you enjoy the conversations, and I'm going to stop the recording, and then we'll get started.
Thanks, everyone.